Seth Savoy, I am pleased to welcome you as the first podcast guest for Kicking the Seat of 2021. I've been off for a couple of weeks to do some planning for the new year and all that. So I'm very excited to talk to you about your feature film debut, which is insane to me after having watched Echo Boomers, which is now available on demand. I want to hear the entire crazy story about how this crazy movie came together and dig into some of the stuff that you cover in this movie, which kind of flew past my radar, but I had a chance to catch up with it, and can't wait. So let's dig in. Who
Cool.
are you? When did you start making movies, and how did you come to get your feature film debut to feature a son of Schwarzenegger and Michael Shannon?
Yeah, man, it was actually a pretty crazy story. I mean, I always kind of knew that I always wanted to make films since I was little, and I went to Columbia and I did the whole, get debt for school and you'll figure it out type thing. And I went to Columbia and I graduated, and when I got to the finish line, I had all this debt, and I was super frustrated about it. Um, and I saw all these newspapers in Chicago of these kids busting into houses, and weirdly enough, I could like really relate to it. And I felt their frustration because I was going through pretty much the same thing at the same time, uh, and that's kind of how it started.
So yeah, I this is the movie opens with a cute title card. I hate seeing this in movies because I always know it's bullshit, but you put a nice little spin on it. It said this is based on a true story if you believe such things.
Yeah, which the idea behind that was I kind of took what these kids were doing and kind of twisted it into its own thing, but like these emotions and these reasons that these kids were doing this are all real and legit, and there's something that's just not talked about. So yeah, I felt like I really had to throw something in there about it.
So you're 27, is that right?
I'm 28. Yeah.
28. Okay. So you started making this movie a couple years ago, I imagine. So let me get back to my one of my initial sort of questions I threw at you. How do you go from reading this news story to and having a whole mountain of debt to I'm going to go make a movie. I'm going to tell this story and I'm going to swing for the fences because this thing does not look like it was, no offense, made by, a kid fresh out of college. It's a really
Yeah, yeah.
slick, production that's really about something. So how did it all come together?
Yeah, so I wrote it, and it took me 2 years to write it. And um honestly, I mean, obviously preparation and a good story where it was a huge part of it, but I think a lot of it was just kind of being lucky. And I was actually in Chicago at Soho House, and I ran into this person named Sean Kaplan. And Sean is a producer, and uh we kind of bumped into each other and we started talking. And uh like, fast forward a week later, and he has Michael Shannon reading the script and having his producer involved. And when someone says, "Hey, I can get Michael Shannon for your movie," you're like, "Yeah, okay, sure." you know but Sean was, he's unbelievable. And he really kind of tied those. He got Michael Shannon's manager involved. And then once that kinda happened, you can really talk to agencies and say, "Hey, who wants to act with Michael Shannon?" And, all these young actors will raise their hands. So
Yeah, I mean it's quite an impressive cast. I've been a fan of Alex Pettyfer's since I saw him in that Disney movie I Am Number Four a number of years ago.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, that was a
I
huge movie.
yeah, I always wondered like why he wasn't, a bigger like star. When I saw that, I was like, oh, this is gonna, he's gonna be huge. And yeah, he's had a fine career, but he's one of those guys that when I see him pop up in a movie, I feel like one of those, I'm still a fan of the indie band that people don't really know is gonna break and be huge. So he's always
Sure.
good, and he
And
was great in this.
what's int oh, wasn't he? And what's interesting about him is that he was actually a suggestion from Michael Shannon, and they'd worked together on Elvis and Nixon, which was a movie that they worked on a while back. And Mike said that, this kid's like, you'll see it when he steps on set. He has this just like energy that's pretty wild. And he did. And the moment, the camera starts rolling, you're like, holy, this guy's a superstar. So I think I really hope this movie gets some more stuff because he's an incredible actor.
So that's a interesting point. So did you, when an actor comes recommended by Michael Shannon, do you audition them or do you just meet with them and say, "Hey, would you like to be in my movie?" Did you have other people in mind for this particular part?
Yeah, with that one particularly, it was just really a conversation. I mean, the fact that Michael Shannon has, done 150 different movies, and this was my first time, obviously I had a lot to learn. And the fact that he was trusting me with putting himself in my first feature, I think says a lot. And so there's no reason that I shouldn't have that trust for his suggestions. And so his suggestion came along, and I met with Alex, and Alex is unbelievably smart, and it worked out. And kind of how we approached it is, I talked to Sean and Byron, the two producers on it, and they said, Seth, like we have two approaches. We can either, um, talk to these agencies and get the largest millennial actors that are out there right now, or we could go this indie route of like where we really try to find the next generation of actors like Michael Shannon. And like that's just so mesmerizing. Like this idea of finding those people who in 10 years, I truly believe that people are going to look back at this movie and say, holy shit, I can't believe all these people were in this movie together. So
I think that's one of the things that was appealing to me. I mean, aside from, and we can talk about Patrick Schwarzenegger in a minute, but I did not recognize a lot of this young cast aside from Alex, who was a bit older. I know there are a couple. Well, let me rewind. This whole movie, for those who are watching this, have no idea what we're talking about. It's about a group of millennial kids, essentially, back in I think 2013 is when the film was set, based on the journalist played by Leslie Ann Warren, the notes that she was taking in the film. Uh, they decide to essentially smash the system by robbing fantastically wealthy people, smashing up their stuff, and then running art, paintings, valuables through Michael Shannon, who is a shipping magnate, like a low-level shipping magnate who can get the stuff overseas and get a huge price for it. There's a newcomer kid played by Patrick Schwarzenegger named Lance, who kind of comes into this operation, and he's the wide-eyed, like, what's going on here? There's crime. And he kind of upsets the apple cart and leads to as you might say, a series of unfortunate events. But yeah, it really speaks to the frustration of a generation and a couple of generations. Now, I know this was coming right out of the 2008 crash, but as we're seeing now with COVID and different degrees of political, we're going through we're going through economic downturns again now. So there's a whole, it's like an evergreen kind of frustration, unfortunately. But yeah, with Patrick Schwarzenegger, was he recommended? Did you just happen to find him in casting? How did that come about?
yeah, I had watched a few of Patrick's stuff. I watched Daniel Isn't Real, which was a South by Southwest film a few years ago. And yeah, we were originally we had Nick Robinson. And with Nick was great, but the scheduling just wasn't working out.
Mm.
And he was at UTA, and UTA kind of suggested Patrick. And the more I started to look into Patrick, the more I just started to fall in love with um, just kind of who he is as an actor and how different this role is for him. Was just it's totally not him at all to play this nerdy character. Um, and he does great at it. And when I met with Patrick, he understands like the political relevance of it, which made it so important. Like that was one of the most important things to me, that these actors started to realize what we were saying. Like I know a lot of people take the movie too seriously and all that stuff, but like there is a message and a tone that's being said. And like you mentioned, I really wanted to put a timestamp and grasp what that millennial frustration feels like. And that was kind of the goal of the movie, which I think it did.
Now, as far as the story goes, you say people are taking it way too seriously. We'll come back to that in a bit because I have a feeling I know what you're talking about. But
Sure.
I took it very seriously, and I also got a lot out of it. It's a fun Well, I hate to say it's a fun movie because it, it goes to some very dark places, but it's
It
got a
is though.
tremendous, it got
It
a
is.
tremendous
Yeah.
style to it, right? But what
Yeah.
it says is a message that I don't think, and it's not exactly a message movie, but it's got points of view that we don't necessarily hear in modern films or even modern culture surrounding the issues that you're talking about. And I wonder, as a young writer who's dreaming up this movie and you're speaking to your own millennial frustrations about what's going on, uh, how did you find the balance of a perspective that is represented in Michael Shannon's character? Because a lot of the movie is, yeah, smash the system, screw the rich. They've got too much and they don't know what to do with it. There's a lot of people starving and they're desperate and they've got all this debt. But Michael Shannon's character comes onto the scene and he has some kind of harsh words for the snowflakes, as it were, but he also offers a balanced point of view, a nuanced point of view. And I wonder, how did you come to that? Did you talk to older people in your life who maybe had a different perspective, or did you have a perspective that was more balanced than perhaps what we
Yeah.
see
So
from?
yeah, it's actually pretty is funny because I think at one point, I wrote it with a writer named Jason Miller, who's a really good friend of mine, and there's one point where the script we were reading it and it sounded just a little bit too millennial. You know what I mean? Like we didn't have that perspective, and so we ended up hiring a writer named Kevin Bernhard, and Kevin is 50ish and kind of is in that range, and so we ended up. Meeting him for a few weeks and kind of pounding out a new version with a little bit more perspective. But I felt like that was really important that that perspective was in there because that perspective is a reality and it's something that like what these kids were doing and how they were going about it and their justifications on it, it was bullshit. And someone needed to call him out on it. And so I'm glad that we ended up getting that balance. And when you give Michael Shannon dialogue, I mean, I think it, does it for itself.
Very much so, and I also like Leslie Ann Warren playing the reporter, as I mentioned. Well, she's a journalist. She's working on a book about this incident, and she comes to visit various members. I'm not really giving anything away because it's how the movie opens. Various members of this gang end up in prison, and she's interviewing them for the book. And towards the end, she gets to kind of step outside the passive journalist mode and give give her own 2 cents, and she gets some of that back. Again, it's a nice give and take there. When
Sure.
you're hashing out the details of this story, um, were there any kind of philosophical arguments? I mean, you're getting sort of that different perspective, which is what you wanted, but was when you're popping each other's bubbles, was there any kind of tension there, or did you all just kind of figure out like, oh, this makes sense, that makes sense, it'll make for a really rich story, and we're all friends?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. I mean, it was a pretty fun thing, especially when you work with people, you really enjoy. I mean, it makes it so much fun. So, but there were
Um,
definitely some points that we wanted to make in terms of, not necessarily politically, but we were talking about the people taking it too seriously thing. I mean, I think a lot of people are very used to this traditional standard filmmaking and writing technique of like there has to be a protagonist that you like, there has to be an antagonist, like you have to root for this person or you don't have to root for this person. And that's something that I think we really wanted to break with this movie is in real life there's a whole bunch of gray. No one's, good or bad. We all live in the gray zone. And so I really wanted to make a movie where that's how the characters, like they did do things that were shitty and they did do things that were right. So like half the time you're pulling for them, half the time you're just like, oh my god, these guys are assholes. And I think the people who don't like the movie, that's normally their argument with it. But I really love what we've created, and I think it's realistic, and I think it just has texture to it.
it really does. One thing I wanted to touch on is, and it might be a bit of a touchy subject. I don't know how much you look at reviews, but the tomato meter score, it's audio or critics 38%, audience 96%. So
Oh
it's like,
wow.
yeah, so it's like it's sort of an age old argument, or a relatively new age argument of, review aggregators and their importance, and also the discrepancy between what professional critics think and what, ticket paying audience goers, or I guess downloading audience goers now because we're in the pandemic, renters, think of the film. So, what's your take on that in terms of, how the critical reception to the film has been?
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's been I really believe that once people have a conversation with me about it, it's like a puzzle piece that works. Like they're just like, "Oh my gosh, I get it." Uh, and so it's been interesting, and I really appreciate and like read a lot of reviews, and it's just kind of funny to see the people that get it and don't get it. But originally this movie was made for audiences, and it was made to just have a good time and kind of take you away for an hour and a half of this just ridiculous world we live in today. And so it's interesting, it'll be just something to watch on like how they react to the next one. But I'm just really thrilled that the audiences have acted so just kindly to it and really loved it.
Now, it's funny because you say to be taken away, escapism. I look at movies like this more as confrontism. It's entertainment,
Mm,
but it really is
good
about the
point.
issues that people are dealing with. But in a
Yeah.
film such as this, I think that the distinction is it is escapism because it is kind of a fantastic, crime heist adventure story drama, but there's so many different perspectives and ideas bouncing around here that I don't feel like people who watch it, even if they're just watching it passively, can leave without really thinking about what they are, seeing and hearing and even saying outside the theater. You open the film and there's a few of these dispersed throughout of news coverage, archival footage
Mm.
from Fox News, from different business and news channels talking about the crash and millennial woes and things like that. One question I had watching this is, how did you get the clearances for all that stuff? I mean,
It's there's Yeah, you can go through processes. I mean, it's a lot easier if it's a parody, obviously, but we weren't exactly saying anything positive or negative about what those reporters or the news that was actually happening. We were just kind of regurgitating it, and because of that, when you ask for it, they're actually really kind about it. And
oh, okay.
luckily, I begged my producers for more money, and they found it. So
And that's, another thing. And these are not things that I think about necessarily when I'm watching, a seasoned director working with, a huge budget on a mainstream film. But when I'm watching an independent filmmaker, especially one who has a debut that looks as slick as this, things pop into my head. Like, how did you figure out how to wrangle a hospital emergency room for that? I'm not going to spoil the sequence, but there is a visit to the emergency room.
that's
uh,
actually a school, believe
that
it
was
or
a
not.
school.
That was a school. The hospital sign is all CGI'd, and yeah, yeah.
The,
Go back and look at that.
I thought the hospital sign looked like it might have been a digital effect, mostly because most hospitals, they'll have like the logo of the hospital with emergency on it. So I'm like, it's probably,
Yeah,
but the actual interior was a school. Wow.
yeah, yeah. It was a school, and
I
we
don't know.
actually shot some of it, and we shot half of it in Salt Lake, half of it in Chicago. Um, Mainly just because we started looking at houses in Chicago, and you find a $6 million house in the suburbs, and it was so much smaller. Like it didn't work. Like it was too
Right.
small. And then so we went to Salt Lake, and obviously $6 million in Salt Lake get you a palace. So
And that was something else I was wondering about, because you go for it, man. When these kids break into these houses, they're not just quick montages where you could believe that you had one or two houses, you shot them differently to make it look like 18 different places. You go to a variety of locations, all spectacularly, more opulent than the last. How did you get permission from these folks to shoot there? What was the budget like just to come up with all these artifacts and decorations and furniture that you just end up breaking?
yeah, it's really important to me as a filmmaker. I love shooting on set. I think that shooting on location, on set is just super important. And I told my producers that and before we even hired him. I told him, like, I really want to do this on location. I think it's important. I think it'll give it a texture. Um, and so we all kind of went into it with that mentality of like, this is what we're gonna do. We just got to find the right people to let us in their house. So that's kind of what ended up happening. So
And how do you find those right people? Is it you just the producers cast a net, or they're like, oh, I know someone who's moving, or they're getting ready to demo this house so you can use it? How does that
yeah,
come about?
so yeah, our location manager was very transparent with the people, and um, there's this one particular shot where it's the first break in, and Patrick's looking at all the stuff that's destroyed, and it's this long push in on him. And the owners were actually there for that. Like they were just shocked in a positive way of just like what we were turning this into. And it just took a little bit. We had to probably check on 10 houses before, and we'd find houses, we'd be like, man, this is great, but like, we're not gonna do this and not tell them. Like, we got to tell them beforehand. And so we told them, and majority of them wanted to be there and watch it.
And as far as that goes, I mean, having the house is one thing, but in terms of the damage that was being done, did you have a team of like set designers to either come up with original pieces and furniture and decor that was going to be broken, or did you kind of scout these houses out and then try and replicate what was already there?
Yeah, so what we did was we tried to use as much stuff as possible that was already there, that we knew we wouldn't be able to break. Big tables, things like that. We were like, cool, that stuff can stay. Let's bring in the rest. So while these actors were doing it, there were a few things that were like a no. You know what I mean? Like, we don't own that. But I wanted to make it in majority of them, especially in the first living room. Almost everything in that room was breakable, and I wanted to give these actors this freedom of being able to destroy anything that they wanted to. And I think just that energy comes across, which is kind of fun.
Now, in terms of that, did they have an opportunity to rehearse? Because I imagine, you don't have all the money in the world, so some of these things, if you break it and it's not the right take, you're going to have to, go through hell to recreate that moment, and certainly that furniture. So, how did you prepare for that? How did they prepare for it?
Yeah, it was one of those things where we walked through it a few times before we actually let them loose. And there were, while they were doing it, we'd say freeze, move the camera, whatever, just kind of, quickly grab these additions. But that was honestly probably one of the hardest days, just because you have so much to shoot. To give it that energy, you need so many cuts, you need so many angles. But yeah, I think that first break in really is something that, when people watch it, they say, holy shit, they didn't just like, bling ring it where they break in and steal shoes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they were really trying to send a message, which is kind of at the heart of the film. Um, One thing I wondered about was going back to the script and this idea of balance and perspectives. We get a little bit of the motivation behind each of the characters that are on this kind of break and take team. And they're all there for their different reasons. They all have these kind of psychological scars, which, as the narration points out, dictates what they're going to go to smash up first. And what I loved was the way that some of this destruction was filmed is that balance, that empathy, which is empathy for the 1%, in a manner which is not something that we get a lot. As these kids are breaking up all of this stuff, particularly in the moment where one of the family portraits of the people whose houses that they're in gets
Mm,
burned, deliberately set on fire. What I loved about that moment is, in the hands of a different director, that would have been seen as a callous middle finger to that 1%. But the way that it's presented in Echo Boomers, the idea is, yeah, these are filthy rich people, but they all are also people, first and foremost. And the lives of the people that are being lived behind those big gated community walls may in fact be different than the perception of the people who are breaking in and destroying those homes. I just I just wanted to say that the way that the break-ins were filmed, it doesn't glorify anything really, and it doesn't condemn either. And I thought that the visual storytelling was really kind of masterful in the way that that came across.
Thanks. Yeah, that was something that I really it was conscious, you know what I mean? I didn't want that's the crazy thing about this, right? Is that they're destroying other people's lives. And so I wanted there to be some seriousness to it at some points, and in that part of the film, particularly where you're hearing everyone's kind of backstories of, Chandler in the kids' room and those type of things, they're just like they just kind of make your heart go to your stomach for a minute, and you're just like, man, this is just like just really deep and just kind of hurt. So I'm glad to hear that. That really means a lot. Either you get it or you don't, and so it's been refreshing lately to hear people that really get it.
I wanted to step back to Michael Shannon really quick, because he's a director himself. I know he does a lot of stage plays around Chicago. So, did you get
Yeah.
any, aside from actor recommendations, did you get any advice from him, or did you ask advice from him, or was he just like, "I'm an actor in your film, you use me as you see fit"?
Yeah, so he was just really just supportive of the entire process, and kind of like how I mentioned earlier, when I'm doing this for the first time ever, and this is his 180th time on set, I really do have a lot to learn. And what was crazy about it is, even though it was my first time, he completely trusted me, and he knew as soon as I showed up on set, I knew exactly what I wanted. But I also did a pretty good number of takes because I just love to have the options, and I think he respected that, and he uh, he really did just whatever I said. He kind of did it without question, and he looks as directors as a tool, or as at the actors as a tool to the director, and yeah, that's how it was, and he was great.
His part actually reminded me of another film that he did a few years ago called 99 Homes, which was,
Mm.
very similar in terms of theme. And this is almost like the downscale cousin of his character from that movie. I don't know if you saw it,
It
but
is. I did. I loved that movie.
yeah,
Loved it.
and he was terrific in it. I think this is a kind of a lovely companion piece to that. And, you know, Lance is sort of a companion to, or spiritual companion to, Andrew Garfield's character in that movie. So I love the parallels, but they also managed to say completely different things, about a similar crisis that affected people in different ways.
That's funny that I love 99 Homes. I think that Andrew Garfield is incredible in it, but I hadn't made that connection. But now that you mention it, they go hand in hand.
Yeah. So I guess one thing I was wondering watching this movie is, and this is not jumping ahead to the end of the interview or anything, but I'm just curious, what's next? Like, how do you follow this? Do you have another kind of rip from the headline story that you've been chewing on for a couple of years that you want to get going?
Yeah, I really think um, that finding these movies that are politically relevant are really important. And whether they're relevant now or they were relevant at a particular time, like for example, Echo has in the last year become more relevant just out of luck. You know what I mean? Just out of how the world has been turning. Um, which has been great and a little scary, you know what I mean? Of just like all the violence that, we're looking at in 2021. Um, but I really think it's just a niche to find those films and stories that are attached to a particular feeling or a particular time frame, like the Black Lives Matter stuff, or just stuff that people need to talk about. I think that's the niche. And so I've been reading as much as possible, trying to find that thing. And I think 2021, I'll definitely have something on the slate that will definitely be in this next realm. I think my biggest goal for this next one is I really want to find a character piece. And yeah, it's right on the horizon. I've been reading some really good stuff. So
And how have you been managing through this pandemic? I mean, you've been trying to get you shot this film obviously before the world turned upside down. How did that affect the release plans, your hopes for how this got out to people? Like, what's the last year been like?
Yeah, it's been interesting, what's funny is, we had pickup shoots for Echo. We had them on February 27th of 2020.
Wow.
Yeah. So, so, if we would've waited a week, we would've been in trouble. Um, but, um but it was interesting, like, every filmmaker obviously wants to see their movie in theater, of course, but, it was kinda one of those things that I really believe um, that everything happens for a reason, and originally, without, uh, COVID, I was gonna go up against Dune and Tenant and The French Dispatch and No Time to Die. Seriously, our release date was the same weekend as No Time to Die.
Oh my gosh.
So, like, I love my movie. I think my movie is fantastic, but, like, I'm going to see the James Bond movie, you know what I mean? Like, um, but, and so that kinda gave us this opportunity of, like, I really love the idea that when the studios ran and, you know, indie theaters had nothing to show, these small indies like Echo Boomers, like, got to step up and, we did as many theaters as we could, and we loved this idea of just, like, being a movie that helps out the little guy stay in business. When the studios ran, like, the indies stepped up, and, I loved that idea, and so we pushed for it, and it worked, and, I really think too of, in today's world, you really have to, at least for the next 6 months or so, you definitely have to stream. You have to stream and you have to be in theaters pretty much at the same time, and that's what we did, and Saban kind of, changed their approach to it, it's done really, really well, so I think it actually got more eyes on it due to everything that had happened compared to going against the big dogs, which would just have been impossible to keep my head above water.
Now, as a filmmaker, because you're shooting this and you're writing it for the big screen, because as we've discussed, no one had any idea we'd be where we are now. But does the current reality and the current foreseeable reality affect at all the way that you're thinking about your next picture? I know you're getting the idea together, but in terms of how you're going to shoot it, I mean, I was you're satisfied that it's getting out to a lot of people the way that it is now. But for myself, I'm sitting here watching it on my laptop thinking, I want to be seeing this in a big screen. I'm just wondering, are you thinking next time I need to shoot for the small screen, or I got to pretend like in some distant future, I'm going to be able to see this on the big screen or IMAX or
Yeah,
whatever?
yeah, that's tough, because, like, it's hard. The filmmaker I am, I feel like I'm always gonna design it for a theater because, like, the sound design of it, the way you shoot it, the movement, it's just different in a theater, and I truly believe, everyone's been worried about AMC and all that stuff. I don't think the theaters will ever go away. I mean, sure, there might be less of them, but the movie-going experience is something that's so classic and so ingrained in America. I don't think it's ever. I mean, Netflix and all those people can get as big as they want, but and probably for 2021, obviously with Universal giving majority of their slate to HBO and that type of stuff, I think 2021 will be weird for sure. But I'm planning for, 2022 to really be able to, like, sit all those people who are itching right now to get to the theater. I know you are just as much as I am. Like, I think there's going to be a boom when it comes back, and I want my next feature to be a part of that boom.
Well, and I think that's is something to aspire to, and I hope that the filmmakers who are, using this time to think and plot are thinking along those same lines, because I'm hopeful. I know I've had dozens of conversations over the last 6 months about the future of movie theaters, and are they coming back? And some people say absolutely not, and other people say I hope so, or it's going to be some kind of like a hybrid model where it might be $75 to go to an indie theater to watch the big release or something, because they have to keep their doors open somehow, and $10 a ticket isn't going to cut it. But yeah, I'm definitely hopeful. And I think that one of the key things is, I probably have said this a couple of times, but I mean it. Echo Boomers does not look like a small time production. It looks like a lot of, money was put into it and a lot of heart. I don't know how much of that was an actual budget versus just being very smart about the way that filmed things and edited things together. How much, you don't have to give me a number, but was this a small or a mid, or was it a big budget
Yeah, I
movie?
mean, we had about 2.5 million bucks to make this. That's what we had. So, obviously not a micro budget, but on the end of an indie, I mean, that's about as low as it can possibly get with the actors that we had. Especially with Michael Shannon, and so it was one of those things that every single dollar really, really counted. And the big thing is, like, I really do want to be a part of the studio system as a director. And I wanted to show the studios that, I can make movies that look like your movies for less, with stars that you probably struggle getting. You know, they love these stories, and that's kind of what I wanted to show with this. And I think there's so many different franchises that just really need a reboot, and I think the studio system are slowly going there. With the new Star Wars and all those type of things where they're exploring these different storylines. I really think like Joker is another great example of like that's reviving this classic thing that just needs a good shock to the heart, like a new version of it. And that's kind of where I want to aim for.
So what's your dream franchise? If you got the keys to the kingdom, what would you do?
That's a tough one. I mean, Star Wars is just so hard. I would love to do like an indie film version of a Star Wars movie, of a Michael Shannon character who's stuck working for the Empire and hates it and finds a way to give some information to the Jedi or something. That would be just great.
Now, that's an interesting point because, as we discussed, you are 28, so you were a little kid when the Phantom Menace came out. So you are one of those. I don't know if I've had this conversation yet, except in theory with other people who are my age. Are you an original trilogy guy, a prequel trilogy guy, or a sequel trilogy guy?
Original for sure.
Okay.
I mean, the 1, 2, and 3. It's funny during quarantine. I just had like I wanted to do, 4 through 6, 1 through 3, 7 through 9, and 1 through 3. Oh my gosh, it's so bad. Like all the fake locations. It's just like, oh my gosh. So
I
I
was
mean, yeah, I don't know. I feel like they didn't do enough with 7, 8, 9 for some reason.
Yeah, and I think that reason, just speculation is because, and it's been said a million times, they didn't seem to have a plan, right? There was like they kicked things off with The
Mhm.
Force Awakens, and then the next two were just kind of like whoever came in to work on them was doing something completely different and then cleaning up after the person who had done something completely different.
Yeah, and I feel like one thing that just really hasn't been explored. I'm a big video game nerd, and I've done all the Star Wars video games and Knights of the Old Republic and all those ones. And the coolest thing about those ones is they really put you into a different world, right? Like you're with the sand people in their markets and like these things that I feel like we spend so much time in space in Star Wars that we don't explore these like tiny worlds that have these like wild stories to them. Which I think a ton of people would just eat that up if they kind of just like gave it some texture of like what these worlds looked like and felt like, and kind of all that.
Yeah, they've done a bit of that on The Mandalorian. I don't know if you've been keeping up with that show.
Man, I have, and that's what I'm talking about. Like that's great. And recently, the last 3 or 4 episodes were just like mind blowing.
Yeah, although if I see Tatooine one more time, I'm gonna jump off a ledge somewhere. But
Dude, and how many times is he gonna fix this? Like he's fixed ships for like 7 out of 20 episodes. He's been fixing a ship.
well, it's rough out there in space.
Yeah, obviously.
Um, so yeah, getting back to echo boomers, um, I guess as far as like what do you want people to take away from this film ultimately, besides kind of a good time? Um, it's been a while since finished, since you wrote the film, since you shot it, and since you edited it, or it's been edited and directed. Do you feel differently about what the film is trying to say than when you first kind of came up with the concept?
Yeah, a little bit. It's always kind of stuck in my head that what I wanted to depict is obviously this struggle and this frustration, but at the end of it, I don't want to spoil the ending, but the motel scene is hands down probably my favorite scene in the movie. Um, but I really think I wanted to make this point of that obviously millennials have this frustration and angst, but on the flip side of what this awful group was doing, they've actually been extremely constructive, and they've actually been changing the world in a whole bunch of positive ways, and that these kids set their minds to something awful and they accomplished it. But it works the same with the people that do that in a positive aspect. And when you look at what the millennials have pushed for in terms of equal pay depending on whatever gender you are, and kind of these things that are important to us, and I think a lot of people have realized that they're important to everyone. And I think Echo kind of represents that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think, well, especially in this last week and a half, things have gotten really complicated and really bizarre. There's a lot more, like this last 8 months, I think, has just been a continuous smashing and breaking of things socially, politically. But one of the things I think you just touched on it is taking that frustration, that anger, and channeling it into something and really building something. You can build something that's positive, you can build something that's negative, but just taking that control with whatever resources you have, and working, building a community, even if it's a found family around you, to enact change. Hopefully it's something that's going to benefit everybody and not lead to more misery. But that was something that was surprising to me. The last shot in the film, again, I'm not going to spoil it, but the main character Lance is asked a question, and we cycle back, as we do a little bit throughout the film, these rapid fire flashbacks of what the characters are thinking, and it sort of turns those previous flashbacks on their head with what he thinks about in that moment and his very surprising answer to the reporter. um, I think it's sort of a great thesis for the film. I wish we could spoil it because I want
Yeah,
I want
yeah,
to talk
and
about more, but
what's
people will understand. I think when they see it, they'll get what I'm talking about.
yeah, and what's interesting too is that I really wanted to represent something that was, first off, I wanted to show this kind of kinetic energy that this would have, right? This thrill of doing drugs, breaking into houses, for the first 25 pages or 25 minutes, really showing that, like, this is wild. But the rest of the movie, I kind of wanted to show how much bullshit like the millennials kind of spew sometimes, that it really is just complete BS and it's making up excuses. And what's crazy too, which I wish if I would have had a little bit more of a budget and more time, one thing that I think is really interesting about Echo is that, and about millennials in general, is that the problems that we spew, the generation before us had those exact same problems. And they said that about the ones before them. And it's like
Yes.
we never learn our lesson. And so millennials think that they're special because they have this problem, when in reality, it's happened again and again and again. And even in the movie, when they're like, oh yeah, let's do Molly, it's like in the 80s, it was called something different and it was the exact same thing. So like you're not special. You're actually just repeating, or you're repeating history. And I think that once you think about that and you watch the movie, it kind of hits a whole bunch of, kind of strings of like, this really is just history repeating over and over.
And it does kind of beg the question, is this going to be the generation that breaks that cycle, or are all the howling activists today going to be the sellouts of tomorrow? It's, you know,
It's a great way to put it. That's
I
a
don't
really
know.
great way to put it. Yeah, who knows? Yeah.
Oh, but in one way, I think it'd be really funny if it turned out that to be the case, but another way, it'd be really sad because it's like it's just this treadmill of, malcontents and then millionaires, or I guess
Yeah.
trillionaires at this point. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, I want to thank you very much for taking some time to talk with me, and for sharing this movie with me. I was very impressed by it. Very, moved, not emotionally, but mentally, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Totally.
Again, I don't get to see this kind of entertainment very often. So, whatever you come up with next, I hope to be able to talk to you about it again. And yeah, best of luck with whatever you end up doing.
Yeah. Let's stay in touch and let's do this again for the next one.
All right. Well, take care, stay safe, and yeah, we'll talk to you later.
Talk soon, Ian.
All right. Bye.